Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, I found this article from It's Foss, and it was very interesting to point out one of the things that could be going on with agentic AI soon, one of the proposed solutions, and why I think there is a little bit of a challenge to the solution, albeit not a critical one, because if it were that critical, it would be a whole critical issue to the whole internet. Of course, I want to mention this because the Linux Foundation is actually funding some of this as well. So effectively, we are trying to figure out how can you control AI agents from basically going rogue on the internet. And the neatest way, probably the most valid way I could think of, is basically running something like DNS for AI agents that will give that same authority to the agent as we have domain names giving authority. So the DNS, the domain name system, is that what it's called? Domain name service. I'm sorry. This is what controls making the internet usable to people who read letters like It's Foss instead of a string of numbers like whatever their IP address happens to be, which I don't have that information right in front of me. But what they're proposing is called an ANS, an agent name service that sits on top of the DNS. And this way, when a company or an individual maybe has an agent, they can have it verified through the same chain that domains are verified through, which does work outside of a problem that we will get to here in a moment. So effectively, you would put your agent on something like a subdomain or something like this. And then it's just the way a lot of the third-party structures and things like that work on the internet now. I do this for my clients all the time, whether you're hosting your email at, Microsoft or Google, Lord help us, or do something more sane like Proton Mail, whatever else. You have to verify that you own the domain if you're trying to connect your own domain name. Well, you do this by putting in a registry into the DNS, assuming that whoever has the control of the domain will be able to control everything attached to that domain. So if we add another line of DNS for agents, now this can verify that the agent is actually acting on behalf of the company or the entity, or at least the domain name, so we can do some verifications. So since the DNS system already works, it's mature, it's what we use to do your SSLs and adjust your emails and forward websites and add third parties and things like that. Effectively, we're just adding a new service on top of this that it has to pass the DNS check first, and then it's going to go in and add an ANS verify now, so that the person running the individual AI system here can get in here and run its instructions and run AI. Now, GoDaddy is actually already working on this, and a standard, the agent name service, is already working on an open standard for this, allowing any entity that wants to run an agentic AI to be able to verify itself. So then a company running some store, which is open to be shopped on by an agentic AI, has to check and verify that AI happens to have the authority to do what it's asking it to do. So here's actually the GitHub repository. There's the agent name service here. And so they have the information here about what they're doing. DNS plus a certification of transparency. So the idea here is that even checking this, you can give your agent various types of authority based on the types of records in here. Think of this on DNS level as like a text record. A text record is used to verify your domain with Google. Once you do that one time, you are open to use any Google services tied to that particular domain. Of obviously other things like tracker codes or whatever else you're doing may have to be implemented on the website. But it is a good and a valid situation, a good way to do this. The only problem with this, and the scammers are going to be on this, so we have to retroactively be thinking about it, and that is DNS cache poisoning. There are a number of different bugs. This is just one of them, which can interfere with this. Because remember, the DNS is that top-level system of trust for this domain name, and if anything messes with that DNS, you're going to have serious problems, especially if the DNS is telling the website what the agent is allowed to do. Well, now what happens when somebody knows such and such a company is running an agentic AI and they can poison the cache on the server, on the computer, or even in the whole supply chain? All of those are ways that DNS poisoning can work. Well, you can rewrite the ANS based on that DNS, and you can literally take full control over an agentic AI and effectively make it into your own AI acting under the behalf and the authority of somebody else. That is something we should proactively think about how to solve before we just haphazardly throw agentic agents all over the internet. But I did want to mention this because it was a very fascinating approach. And I honestly, I think this is the best approach. We just have to deal with DNS cache poisoning as it relates to ANS and that verification. Because if, and let me just explain briefly the way some of these malwares work. Some of them will affect your local computer. So the individual local computer acts as that final domain authority. And then effectively somebody is able to rewrite a domain authority on a local targeted machine. The other thing you could do is you could poison the DNS servers themselves or some intermediary. So, of course, DNS is a cascaded effect. So the last line of defense is actually your host's file. So if you go into your host's file, you can actually come down into this and you can give it an address. So if you do this and do facebook.com, and then you put in another one for www.facebook.com, this will block this computer from being able to access Facebook. Obviously, I can't do it right there because I'm not logged in as a pseudo user here. But this is how this works. There have been some malware that will actually be able to, easier to do on Windows because you need root access on Linux. But if you can gain root access and can modify the DNS records of your computer, they can actually do that. If on a device like an Android device, you can set custom DNS. If somebody gets in there and is able to find a malware way to reset the custom DNS on an Android phone, they could point it to an address that most people don't even know to look for it, but it can introduce a lot of poisonous DNS. And what this means is you would come over and just edit the IP address to what literally any server in the world you would want it to point to. You know, just, well, there's no IP addresses that start with that. I'm just totally making up a bunch of numbers. So if you were to go ahead and do this, anytime this computer goes to facebook.com on any system, it tries to hit off of this IP address. Well, if I'm a hacker that controls this particular IP address, I can create a fake version of Facebook that even could duplicate what Facebook really looks like. You log in over there, it's like, oh, you need to log in. And it's basically a built-in phishing page targeted to you. Well, if that's how easy you can overwrite the DNS, that is also how easy you could overwrite the agentic the agentic AI. And so ultimately that is an issue there. I actually hit the wrong button there. So I thought that was an interesting thing. So this is a good way to do it. We just have to be prepared for the inevitable problem of what happens when somebody steals our agentic AI and asks it to do a whole bunch of things that we did not authorize it to do. That is the type of malware that we are going to see. And I would say once our once our agentic AI hits, hits, I'd say 10, 20, 30% of people and companies using it, we're going to start to see these forms of malware coming out. And I bet that DNS cache poisoning is going to be the way they're going to go. Let me know your thoughts about all that in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.